Now it's time for today's perspective. And around the world, 45 million children suffer from wasting. 150 million children have stunted growth. And every single year, maternal malnutrition contributes to 800,000 newborn deaths. Now, those figures, as today a Nutrition for Growth Summit is being held here in Paris. The idea was to discuss the major issues as the world faces one of the greatest food and nutrition crises of our time. Well, the summit, which happens every 4 years, designed to be a moment for global leaders to deliver bold political and financial commitments as well to accelerate progress on nutrition. One of the organisations attending is, of course, the UN organisation UNICEF. Its Executive Director, Catherine Russell, joins me here on set ahead of that conference. Thanks very much for coming in and talking to us. So ahead of the summit, I mean, you say that the world is facing one of the greatest food and nutrition crises of our time. Why do you say that? They're pretty strong words, aren't they?
They're strong words, but it really does represent the situation that we have in the world right now, which is that children are facing enormous challenges, many challenges, honestly. But the nutrition challenge is a particular difficulty because if children don't get a good start, and you mentioned the maternal issue, if children aren't well nourished in the womb and then in their first 1,000 days, those are the critical days that we look at, it means that they have a lifetime of challenges, and we can't really catch up from that, right? So even if children get like a decent start in life, then we can continue to improve their nutrition as they go. But if they don't get that start, it's really crippling for the rest of their lives. And that's why you see huge numbers, 150 million children who are stunted. And that means that they don't grow properly when they're young, and they never catch up, and that's developmental challenges and physical challenges. So it's really important to get kids off to a good start. And I think that's why this conference is so important, to bring attention to this issue and to say, look, the world has a lot of problems, we get that, but we have got to pay attention to the beginning of life for children and make sure that they get the nutrition they need so that they can grow and participate ultimately in their economies and their countries. I mean, it really is a critical first step.
I mean, just before we came on air, we were talking about the other conference, which obviously we've been talking about a lot of the news as well to do with Ukraine. We've got other major issues, environmental issues we were talking about earlier in the week with glaciers. Why do you think this is one of the main issues that the world should be concentrating on?
You're right. There are a lot of issues. And the truth is, when it comes to children, all those issues are related. And I think a lot about the challenges that children face in conflict. And, as you mentioned, there are conflicts ongoing. We estimate hundreds of millions of children live in conflict zones. That means, again, all of these things that any normal child, any child that any of us knows or loves, there are very basic things that you want. You want them to be well nourished. You want them to be educated, right? Those things are critical. And I think when you have conflicts, when you have climate challenges, all of this makes it much more difficult to do that. What's the consequence of that? That means that these children don't get off to a decent start, and it will impact their family. And most importantly, if you look at girls, it'll impact their children, right? If they're not well nourished, their children are less likely to be nourished. So it's a generational problem, and it's really something that the great thing about it is we do know what to do, right? We know how to address this problem. We've had tremendous success in getting children nourished and in reducing the under 5 mortality rates. That's been a huge accomplishment of the international community. And so I think we know how to address it. And if we don't, we just really, these children, I'm not saying it's a waste, but it's a tragedy to me, right? Because it's something that is easily dealt with if we take the time and invest the resources to do it.
And being realistically, of course, it comes as amid a sharp, sudden decline in funding, notably from the US, but across the world as well.
Yeah, across the world. I mean, we've been seeing this the last 2 years, really starting, where development assistance is under tremendous pressure in many countries. And of course, as you say, the United States this year, we're seeing some real challenges there. And I think, for us, we look at this. I know there are expenditures, and I know, taxpayers, take a careful look at them, but they're such good investments, right? If you invest in children, it's something that pays off forever down the road, both for those children, but also for their countries and as trading partners and a more secure world. In every way that you look at it, it is in the interest of all of us to make sure that children get off to a good start.
And how much of an effect is that pulling of US funding having, would you say?
I think we're assessing at this point what it looks like. It's a little bit of a process at this stage. I think the key from our perspective is, taken as a whole, the challenges on the development side, the pressures on the development side are significant. And I think we are all struggling to try to figure out how we can, do our best, given what we're facing and what we have to deal with, to be as efficient and effective as possible. We're pushing ourselves that way. We work a lot with other partners. We have some great private sector folks who work with us. We're looking for ways to expand the universe of people who are paying attention to these issues and working to address them. And, we will deal with what we have to deal with, but it certainly is helpful when countries come to the table, recognize their sort of responsibility for taking care of the people in the world who have the most dramatic needs, and children, I think, are at the top of that list.
So funding crisis, right, as well as the problems are increasing, and I'm thinking here, of course, due to climate change.
Listen, it is so many different things coming together at one time, which is what's alarming for all of us. I think we're all working as hard as we can to try to address these challenges, but for sure, climate is a very serious problem for children. Crises, as I said, very serious problem for children. In both cases, children rely on government services, right? They rely on healthcare and they rely on education. And those are impacted really dramatically by both crisis and climate. I was in the Pacific a couple of months ago, and you could just see the incredible impact that the climate challenges, these cyclones and things, were having on children, ripping down their schools, making it really hard for them to get adequate food and nutrition. And I think, this is going on all around the world, and we're struggling. I think the international community is struggling to try to address these. And again, it's why I think this conference is so important, and we're very grateful to the French government for doing it, for bringing attention to it, and for saying, look, yes, there are a lot of problems in the world, but we can't forget the children in this process, and we have to make sure that we're doing everything we can to protect them.
A lot of problems right around the world. Where are the hotspots? I know Sudan, you're saying, is one of them.
Sudan is terrible, actually. I think, if I had to point to one place, just in terms of the scale of it, it is terrible. We have essentially 19 million school-aged children there. 17 million of them have been out of school for 2 years. That's very hard to try to address in the long run. We're seeing very high rates of malnutrition. We're seeing famine percolating in about 4 or 5 different areas. And, we've been warning about this, about famine taking hold there. And I think we're just alarmed at what is happening. And it's very, very hard because of the ferocity of the conflict to get access to some of these populations. UNICEF put out a report, I think 2 weeks ago, about the sexual violence that's taking place there, and including sexual violence against children, some as young as a year old. I mean, we have reports of, 4 children it's just really horrific things. And I think it's the place that definitely is giving me a lot of sleepless nights, but it's not the only one. I mean, obviously, we're still struggling in Gaza, the DRC, Haiti. I mean, there are many places where these conflicts just take hold and children get left behind, and it's really devastating to see that.
And it's not just about malnutrition, isn't it? It's also about overnutrition, if that's a word. I'm thinking here about obesity.
Exactly. It's so interesting because, we think of obesity as an issue in sort of richer countries, essentially, right? But it's certainly the case in many other countries, too, because they're getting more and more access to sort of processed foods. And also they don't have really diverse diets in many places. So it's a problem we're seeing. In some places, you see children who are malnourished and also overweight. I mean, it's crazy, right? Trying to make sure that children get just a proper diet. I was in Tanzania a couple of weeks ago, and it was amazing. They had a community sort of get together on a Saturday, and they brought together people who would, do the vaccinations for the kids, weigh, measure, and all the rest of it. And then they were teaching the parents, mostly mothers, honestly, about how to nourish children properly, what kinds of food groups they need, how to prepare the food. And it's almost that simple in some cases, where people just don't always know what children need, that they have to have protein in their diets, right? That they have to have variety in their diets. In some cases, they don't have access to those things, but in some cases they do, and they just need to be educated about it.
So finally then, bearing in mind everything that we've talked about in the last 5 or 10 minutes, what can this conference actually do? What can be achieved today, do you think?
I think the conference is important for 2 reasons. One, I think it draws attention to the issue. And again, there's so much happening every minute that it's hard for people to focus on this challenge in particular. But making sure that children are taken care of is really, it's a sacred obligation for all of us. All of the adults in the world have to do better by children. But second, the conference brings together really fantastic partners who are working in this space, who maybe can expand the work they're doing. We're grateful for that, and I'm very much looking forward to it today, and happy that the world is paying attention to the needs of children today.
Good to have you on the programme today.
Thanks
Thank
so
you
much.
very
Really
much for coming in
appreciate
and
it.
talking to us. Catherine Russell, Executive Director of UNICEF, heading off straight away to that conference. Thanks very much
Stuart,
for being
thank
with
you.
us.